Beverly Hills emergency.
Yes, please.
What's the problem?
Someone killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Someone killed my parents.
What? Who? Are they still there?
Yes.
The people...
No.
August 20th, 1989 was a night of horror in Beverly Hills. Popular music executive Jose Menendez and his wife Kitty were gunned down in their home by their own sons, Erik and Lyle.
I've been in this business for over 33 years, and I've heard of very few murders that were more savage than this one was.
The identity of the perpetrators was never in question. Lyle and Erik openly confessed to the murders. But what drove them to such a heinous act? Was it sheer greed, or was there deeper, more sinister darkness festering within the family?
What do you believe was the originating cause of you and your brother shooting your parents?
When the investigation into the murders began, unsettling and disturbing details began to emerge, shocking those who had once viewed the family through a lens of admiration and envy. On the fateful night of August 20th, 1989, when the tragic murders of Jose and Kitty Menendez occurred, nobody knew this case would become a sensation for years to come. It was a classic case of when killers were the first ones to arrive at the crime scene. Lyle, in a state of emotional turmoil, placed a frantic call to 911, breathlessly informing the operator that someone had killed his parents.
Beverly Hills emergency.
Yes, please.
What's the problem? What's the problem?
Someone killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Someone killed my parents.
What? Who? Were they shot?
Yes.
They were shot?
Yes.
Person still there?
What happened? We have units around. What happened? Who shot who? I don't hear anything. I just came home. You came home and found who shot? My mom and dad.
You know what? They're still in the house, the people that did the shooting.
As the police officers arrived at the scene, the brothers rushed out of the house, running towards the officers while desperately shouting for help. They seemed to have a plan in place. Surprisingly, when the police arrived, they didn't conduct gunshot residue tests on Lyle and Erik, tests that could have revealed whether the brothers had recently discharged firearms. Both brothers fabricated alibis, asserting they'd been attending the Taste of LA festival at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium at the time of the killings. The officers and forensic personnel who processed the crime scene described it as the most brutal they'd ever encountered in their careers. They noted the horrific sight of blood and brain matter splattered across the room. Jose had been shot 6 times, with a particularly fatal shot to the back of his head, while Kitty suffered a staggering 10 gunshot wounds. In a striking revelation, Lyle suggested to the investigating officers that the killings might be business-related, hinting at the possibility of a mafia hit. Detectives initially pursued this line of inquiry with earnestness, but eventually they hit a dead end. However, in the months that followed, what brought in the first speck of suspicion was Erik and Lyle's free-handed spending. They were expending hundreds of thousands of dollars on luxury items, business ventures, and extravagant travel.
Lyle returned to the Princeton area and began a kind of spending frenzy. His friends say they thought it was his way of dealing with his grief. Over several weeks, he bought clothes, a Rolex, a $62,000 Porsche. Rather than return to school, he bought a restaurant, saying his mother would have been pleased. And for a while, Lyle hired these bodyguards, saying he feared for his own life because his father had a lot of business enemies.
Erik invested in a full-time tennis coach and participated in numerous overseas tournaments, seemingly living leisurely. The brothers even chose to vacate the Beverly Hills mansion, opting instead for adjoining condominiums in the nearby Marina del Rey. During this period, they reportedly spent around $700,000, a conspicuous amount that began to raise suspicions among law enforcement, leading them to consider the possibility of a financial motive behind the tragic events. Adding another layer of complexity to the investigation, Erik's high school friend, Craig Signorelli, approached the authorities, claiming that Erik had confessed to him regarding the murders. Signorelli also revealed that he and Erik had previously collaborated on a 66-page screenplay entitled Friends, which chillingly depicted a son killing his wealthy parents for their inheritance. This was another opportunity for the detectives to close the case right there, so they arranged for Signorelli to wear a wire during a lunch meeting with Erik. But things didn't go as planned. When Signorelli directly questioned Erik about whether he'd killed his parents, Erik firmly denied any involvement. But the growing suspicion was getting stronger by the minute. Lyle's friend, Glenn Stevens, reported a curious incident. Just 1 week after the murders, Lyle made an unexpected trip back home from Princeton to erase something from the family computer. Stevens recalled Lyle telling him that a family member had found a new will, and Lyle felt compelled to go home and delete it. A computer expert hired by Lyle later confirmed that his services were sought to ensure the deletion of a new will that Jose had prepared, which may have allocated less of the estate to his sons. The brothers seemed to have been trapped. As the investigation deepened, it became increasingly clear that the brothers were now under a scrutinizing microscope, with every detail of their lives and actions coming under intense examination. With the excessive scrutiny of news reporters and police officers weighing heavily upon them, Erik and Lyle Menendez found themselves in an increasingly difficult situation. The pressure became unbearable, prompting the brothers to seek help of a psychologist named Jerome Oziel. As the therapy sessions progressed, Erik eventually broke down, revealing to Oziel the most disturbing and grotesque secrets that had long been hidden within their family. In a moment of vulnerability, Erik confessed to Oziel that he and Lyle had indeed killed their parents. However, the motive behind their actions was far from the pursuit of wealth or fame. Instead, it was something so horrific that to this very day, the entire world is trying to decide if it was true or not. As the therapy sessions with Oziel progressed, he began recording their conversations, which would later prove to be pivotal. He confided in his mistress, Judalon Smythe, about Erik's troubling confession. However, the truth about Erik's admission and the full scope of the crime came to light when Smythe ended her relationship with Oziel and informed the police about the brothers' involvement in the murders. She revealed that Erik had confessed during their therapy sessions and disclosed the existence of audio tapes capturing these confessions. Following this tip from Smythe, law enforcement acted quickly. Lyle was arrested on March 8, 1990, just outside his Beverly Hills home, while Erik turned himself in 3 days later after returning to Los Angeles from a trip to Israel. Both brothers were held without bail and incarcerated separately at the Los Angeles County Jail, their fates now intertwined in the chilling legacy of their actions.
What do you believe was the originating cause of you and your brother shooting your parents?
Me telling.
You telling Lyle what? Was it you telling Lyle about something that was happening?
My dad. My dad. If you don't ask, my dad had been to me.
He would take photographs of us, our private parts.
And would he have you come in and pose for these photographs, or how would that happen?
I would just, if we're in the showers or bathtub or changing, he would just use the same camera that my mother used, and then he would come in, take just a photograph or two, and he wouldn't say anything, and then he would leave.
In July of 1993, the Menendez brothers stood trial, each facing a separate jury to determine their fates. The trials were presided over by Judge Stanley Martin Weisberg. Starting with Judalyn Smythe's testimony, the truth behind the murders of Jose and Kitty started to unfold. Judalyn took the stand and told the court about the confessions Erik had made to Dr. Oziel during their therapy sessions.
If I didn't please him and if he didn't love me, then I was going to end up dead.
And why did you think you were going to end up dead?
Because he told me.
And did he say how you were going to end up dead?
Yes, he said that he would call Lyle and Erik and tell them that I had been outside the door and that I knew and that I was wanting to go to the police and that they would kill me.
Since Judlin had already spilled the details of the confessional sessions between Erik and Dr. Oziel, Dr. Oziel had no choice but to share the exact details of the confession.
He sat on the bench, and for a significant period of time, Erik told me things about his father and how his father was a great man and how he intended to write a book about his father. And we headed back to the office, and right before we entered the front door of the office building in which I had my office, he leaned back against, as I recall, a parking meter that was in front of the office door and said, "We did it." He said, "We killed our parents," but I asked him, you mean you killed your parents?" He said, "Yes." And from that point, we went back up into the office.
Did Erik Menendez describe for you, in particular, what it was that he was upset with his father about?
Yes, he did.
What did he say?
Well, basically that the father had just been completely dominating and controlling, was impossible to please, had perfectionistic standards, that he was controlling of a lot of different aspects of Erik and Lyle's life in a very extreme way, and also that he had been very controlling and very damaging to their mother, and that she also was miserable. So basically, they conceptualized the father. Erik told me that they saw the father as someone who was pretty much not possible to live with. That he was just an emotionally dominating, tyrannical person.
Erik disclosed that their father, Jose, had been subjecting both him and Lyle to SA since they were mere children. This horrifying ordeal persisted for years, with the brothers suffering in silence, paralyzed by fear for their lives. Jose had threatened them repeatedly, warning that if they ever dared to speak a word about the heinous acts he'd committed against them, he would take their lives without a second thought.
Did you want something from your brother? Is that why you told him?
I wanted to stop.
Were you seeking help from your brother?
Yes. I told him that it was basically all that was happening.
Ultimately, the brothers reached a breaking point when Jose's threats escalated to a terrifying reality, and they decided they could endure the torment no longer. On August 18th, 1989, in a desperate attempt to find a means to protect themselves, Lyle and Erik embarked on a mission to purchase handguns, visiting several gun stores throughout Southern California. However, complications arose due to issues with Lyle's California driver's license, as well as a mandatory 2-week waiting period imposed by gun laws. The brothers opted to purchase shotguns instead in San Diego, California. Erik used a stolen driver's license belonging to Lyle's friend, Donovan Goudreau. On the evening of August 20th, 1989, Jose and Kitty were busy watching television. It was at this moment that Lyle and Erik entered the room, leading to a heated confrontation with their parents.
I told him that I would tell everybody. Then he said, "We all make choices in life, son. Erik made his, you've made yours."
What did you think was going to happen?
I thought we were in danger. I thought he felt he had no choice.
But to what?
That he would kill us.
The brothers confronted Jose about the ongoing abuse, threatening to expose his dark secret to the world. As tensions escalated, Jose began to walk away, a move that ignited a primal fear in the brothers. They believed that he was going to retrieve his gun, and in a moment of panic, they made the fateful decision to shoot him.
Now, when you got back to the house, what did you do?
I went into the room where my parents were.
Would you back up a little? Why did you do that?
I don't know. I just couldn't stop myself. I was just drawn to the room. I didn't really want to go in, but I could not go in.
Erik stated that he fired the first shot, but ultimately it was Lyle who delivered the fatal blows. A bullet struck Jose in the back of the head, and he followed with a lethal shot to Kitty's face.
I just started crying a lot harder. At one point I started to scream. It was awful, and I couldn't handle what I was seeing.
In the immediate aftermath of the murders, They couldn't believe what they'd done. They stayed in the house, almost believing the police could enter the house at any moment because the gunshots were too loud.
You wanted to get away with it, right?
We really weren't thinking in those terms, and we weren't thinking in terms of. We were just basically thinking that we'd shot our parents and that this was horrible, and that if, I just couldn't tell the police that, and that I did not want to then have to tell them why and explain everything about my family. And neither of us did, and we were pretty firm about that. And I mean, we knew that they could easily figure it out, and we didn't know anything about how they investigate things, and they might figure it out right away. But until they did, they didn't want to volunteer.
In a desperate attempt to cover their tracks, they left the scene to dispose of their blood-stained clothing and later buried the shotgun somewhere along Mulholland Drive. They then made their way to a local movie theater, intending to purchase tickets for the film Batman to use as part of their alibi. However, they quickly abandoned this plan upon realizing that the timestamp on the ticket stub would not support their fabricated timeline. Instead, they redirected their efforts towards the Taste of LA festival at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium. There, they discarded the weapons and changed into clean clothes, free of bloodstains, before returning to their home and feigning shock at discovering the crime scene all over again. This was the moment that could change everything. The question was whether all this was done because they'd planned it all, or was it a defense mechanism? The prosecution framed their case around the assertion that financial gain was the primary motive behind the brutal murders. Under California law, the brothers could only be acquitted of murder if they could convincingly demonstrate that they were in immediate or imminent danger at the time of the killings. The prosecution argued that there was a complete lack of evidence to support claims of imminent danger or self-defense. They argued that the nature of the killings was inconsistent with self-defense, and they backed this up with a piece of shocking evidence. After shooting their mother, Kitty, who was reportedly screaming in pain and trying to crawl away, Lyle allegedly took the time to reload his shotgun before returning to deliver the fatal blow. Throughout the trial, the prosecution painted Lyle and Erik as individuals capable of lying frequently and in intricate detail to evade consequences, suggesting that they could just as easily fabricate stories of child abuse to avoid death sentences.
You portrayed yourself as being very upset to the police when they got there, right?
No, that's why I went there, because we were crying. I was upset. I mean, by the time I talked to the officer a little later, I wasn't crying, and I wasn't trying to fake it, and I wasn't trying to, put on an act or anything like that. I was just feeling what I was feeling.
You wanted to get away with it, right?
We really weren't thinking in those terms, and neither of us did, and we were pretty firm about that. And I mean, we knew that they could easily figure it out, and we didn't know anything about how they investigate things, and they might figure it out right away. But until they did, they didn't want to volunteer.
Before the trial even commenced, there was a witness who came forward and revealed a terrifying detail that would put the brothers under more suspicion. Lyle had attempted to persuade his ex-girlfriend, Jamie Pizarczyk, to lie on his behalf, offering her money to claim that Jose Menendez had made inappropriate sexual advances toward her. This attempt to manipulate the truth was reported to the police by Pizarczyk. When Lyle was finally cross-examined by the prosecution, he preemptively admitted to this under questioning from his own attorney. Later during the trial, the prosecution presented the jury with something that would leave them shocked. Lyle had co-written a screenplay with his friend Craig during high school, which depicted a wealthy young man murdering his parents for their inheritance. However, Judge Weisberg ruled against this, stating that the screenplay was written too long before the murders to be relevant in the current proceedings. The brothers were represented by lead defense attorneys Leslie Abramson for Erik and Jill Lansing for Lyle, who argued that the brothers had acted out of fear for their lives after enduring a lifetime of abuse from their parents. They portrayed their father as a cruel perfectionist and pedophile, while their mother was characterized as an enabling, selfish, mentally unstable alcoholic and drug addict who not only condoned her husband's behavior, but also exhibited violence towards the brothers herself.
What, if anything, did you tell him about any weapons that your father ever threatened you with?
I told him that he threatened me with a knife.
Now, Mr. Menendez, do you remember the kind of knife that your father threatened you with?
Yes.
What kind was it?
It was a jagged knife.
A what?
A jagged knife on one end. It was a Rambo knife.
a Rambo knife?
Yeah, a knife that he had.
Lyle testified that the abuse began when he was just 6 years old, but inexplicably stopped when he turned 8.
After sports practices, he would massage me, and we would have these talks, and he would show me, and he would fondle me, and he would ask me to do the same with him, and I would touch him, and we would undress.
Where would this take place?
In my bedroom, like 2 or 3 times a week. We would be in the bathroom, and he would put me on my knees, and he would guide me, all my movements. He used objects.
What kind of objects?
A toothbrush and some sort of shaving utensil brush.
And what would he do with the toothbrush?
Well, in the bedroom, we'd have what we called object sessions. He'd have a tube of Vaseline, and he just played with me.
Did you tell your mom?
Yes.
What did you say to your mom?
I told her to tell Dad to leave me alone. And he keeps touching me. She told me to stop it. And that I was exaggerating. And that my dad has to punish me when I do things wrong. And she told me that he loved me.
Did you tell your brother? Did you do something to your brother?
Yes.
What did you do to your brother?
I took him out to the woods. Whenever I felt, I don't know, I took him out sometimes, and I took a toothbrush also, and I played with Erik in the same way. And I'm sorry.
When you were about 13, did you think that it might be happening to someone else?
Yes.
And who did you think it was happening to?
Erik.
And did you do something about it?
Yes.
What did you do?
I talked to my dad.
What did you say to your dad?
I told him that I knew what was going on with him and Erik, and I heard noises, and that I wanted him to leave Erik alone.
Erik claimed that he continued to endure abuse well into adulthood, right up until the time of the murders. He revealed that 2 weeks prior to the killings, he confided in Lyle about the sexual abuse he'd been experiencing, which led to a series of confrontations within the family.
It was a big thing holding us back from killing my father, is that we thought that we would just kill Dad and eliminate the problem. And see, the first step, which is when I found out the first suicide, and then it got worse and worse, but I found the suicide and I started crying. I could not read it from below the phone and started crying. She had made a decision that she couldn't take it anymore, and that Dad didn't love her anymore. Is that the affair? I believe it was after she found out about one of the affairs, like the main affair that had been 8 years long or whatever, or maybe after she found out there had been more than one. So I walked in the room when she was crying, or when I did, frequently, she would stop crying, I want to talk about it, my own problem, the alcohol, the drugs, she would bring up to me, it was a sign that it was getting worse, and she would finally come to me and go, "You don't understand how much stress I'm under. I take 13 pills a day. I drink." That's where we sort of feel like, you mentioned before, that we were doing her and us a favor in putting her out of her misery, really. Didn't want to get to a point where my mother killed herself and my father, we were left to deal with my father.
we had to kind of, like I was saying before, we had to make a decision. It was one of the harder ones. It was a separate issue. Okay, these are the reasons my father should be killed. There's no question. What he's doing is impossible to live with myself and for myself based on what he's doing to my mother.
According to their testimonies, the climactic confrontation between the brothers and their parents occurred in the den of their home on the evening of August 20th, 1989, just moments before Kitty and Jose were killed. They recounted that Jose had closed the den's door, an action they described as unusual. Fearing for their lives, the brothers claimed they went outside to load their shotguns, and Erik recalled that when he re-entered the room, he felt compelled to start firing in a desperate bid to protect themselves.
You just learned that your brother had basically threatened to tell on your father.
Yes.
If the two of you disappeared that night, did you have in mind anything that your father might think about that?
Well, I thought Dad was going to kill us, and no matter where we went, anywhere, he was going to kill us. Obviously, my dad thought that Lyle and I were going to go tell somebody.
So if you left the house that night, what do you think your dad would have thought?
That we were going to tell.
That you had gone to tell.
I don't know if we had gone to tell that instant, but that we were definitely going to tell.
So where did the conversation with your brother Lyle lead to Thursday night?
It led to us having to buy guns. Led to Lyle saying, we got to protect ourselves. We got to do something. Because I kept eliminating all of his options.
Okay, he was coming up with options.
Yeah, I was pretty much just crying and doing whatever I was doing. He was saying, well, what if we could do this? Well, what if we do that? He said, calm down, we'll work it out. And I was just not being very helpful.
Did you think any of the options would work?
No.
So a decision was made to try to protect yourselves yourself. Is that it? And you were talking about the fact that Dad would kill you. Is that right?
Yes.
Did you think your mother would stop him?
Oh, I thought my mom would do it with him. There wasn't no one and the other.
Why did you think your mother would do it with him?
Because that's who my mom was. They were very much of a team. Besides the fact that my mom hated us, they were a team.
Were you so sure that your mother hated you before Thursday night as you were after?
After, I definitely knew. For her to have known all those years, I knew she must have hated me, but I thought it before as well.
In order to substantiate their claims of abuse, a huge number of relatives, friends, and acquaintances of the Menendez family took to the stand to testify on behalf of the defense, recounting various instances of both physical and emotional abuse that they claimed to have witnessed. Furthermore, the defense introduced a significant amount of additional evidence aimed at demonstrating that both Lyle and Erik had been victims of abuse at the hands of their father. And the very first piece of evidence presented left the courtroom with chills. Among this evidence were disturbing photographs depicting the brothers' naked bodies at ages 6 and 8, which were particularly unsettling as they had their heads cropped out of the images and the focus was placed on their genitals. One of the photos showed 6-year-old Erik appearing to have an erection.
The sequence of the photographs. Here is a gathering of people. Here is Lyle in the bathtub, one can assume the morning of the birthday party. And here is Erik in bed. Now, Erik is in bed when this naked picture of Lyle is being taken. See, here's the next picture on the roll. Now, are we supposed to believe that 6-year-old Erik, who testified he was not allowed to handle a camera until he was 12 or 13, got out of bed to go take a naked picture of his brother, and then got back into bed so someone could take a picture waking him up? And it isn't until way down here on the roll that the naked picture of Erik shows up, and then a picture of Mrs. Menendez's favorite thing.
And more surprisingly, the envelope that contained these photographs bore the unmistakable handwriting of their mother, Kitty, which said, Erik's 6th birthday.
Now, I think almost as amazing as the fact that these pictures were taken was that these pictures were saved. You will see the envelope. that they came in, and you will see the negatives, and you will see the original small photos, and you will see Kitty Menendez's handwriting that was on the envelope these photos were in, which says Erik's birthday, November 1976. She saw these photographs, and she kept them.
This detail not only highlighted Kitty's knowledge of the inappropriate actions perpetrated by Jose against Lyle and Erik, but also revealed her decision to remain silent and inactive in the face of such grave misconduct. At the tender age of 7, Erik Menendez was brought to the emergency room due to an unexplained injury to his throat, which affected the posterior pharynx, uvula, and soft palate. When the medical professionals examined him, they could tell what horrors Erik had been through. They suggested that this injury could be indicative of oral sexual abuse.
Did you see any indication in Erik Menendez's medical records of an injury to his throat area?
Yes, the direct quote is hurt posterior pharynx, uvula, and soft palate. Senior emergency room, Princeton Medical Center. Okay. Healing well, symptomatic treatment. Actually, it was seen the day before. This is the follow-up note.
And is that consistent with, could that be caused by child sexual abuse, in your opinion?
Yes, could be.
And what, do you have any opinion as to what type of child sexual abuse could have resulted in that particular complaint?
Oral copulation.
Medical records from both Erik and Lyle documented a range of symptoms commonly associated with child sexual abuse, including gastrointestinal issues, unexplained abdominal discomfort, bedwetting, frequent headaches, speech articulation disorders, and teeth grinding. Additionally, Erik had a noticeable scar on his left thigh that was consistent with a knife wound. He testified that this scar resulted from a kitchen knife being used to cut his thighs and draw blood during incidents he described as rough. During the proceedings, yet another family member took the stand and highlighted a sickening incident she'd witnessed at the Menendez mansion. Lyle and Erik's cousin, Diane Vandermolen, recounted a visit to the Menendez home in the mid-1970s, during which Lyle confided in her about the sexual abuse he was enduring at the hands of his father. At the age of 8, Lyle disclosed to Diane that he and his father had been touching each other's genitals.
Lyle came down, and he was asking if he could, I thought he was there to say goodnight. And he started asking me if he could sleep down there because Kathy had already gone and there was 2 single beds.
Okay.
He proceeded to indicate to me by touching himself down and saying that his dad and him had been touching each other down there.
Another cousin, Andy Cano, also claimed that Erik had confided in him about the abuse, which both described as genital massages. Andy Cano recounted an incident from when he was 10 years old and Erik was 12, during which Erik revealed to him that his father was massaging his privates and sought to understand whether such behavior was normal.
Were you familiar with a nickname that your cousin Erik used to refer to himself at about this same time?
Yes, I did.
And what was that nickname?
It was Hurt Man.
Plenty of other family members provided testimony indicating that when Jose was in the bedroom with one of the boys, no one was permitted to go down the hall.
When I first went to stay with them, the 2 boys and Jose would go into the master bedroom and the door would close. And we're taking the boys for a shower. Well, I found it to be kind of strange because I felt they were old enough to take their own baths and their showers, whatever they were going to, because I wasn't that age. I heard what sounded, it was a person, like a person's scream, if you want to call it, like a, ah! And I got up to go down the hall. At that point, Kitty yelled out, looked at me and says, "You're not going down there. Get back here." And okay. If I would have ignored my aunt, if I would have ignored Kitty, and just went up to that door and knocked.
Were there any rules about what you could do when one of the boys was sent down the hall and Jose went into the room with them?
You couldn't go down there. I mean, you stayed in the living room or you did something else, but you didn't go anywhere near the hallway.
Neighbor Alicia Hertz testified about a dinner she attended at the Menendez residence, during which Jose chose to screen the film Pichochi in the presence of both her and his young sons. She recalled that the film opens with a graphic scene depicting the rape of child, and she described Jose's reaction to this troubling content as one that he found to be hysterically funny.
And I have to show you guys this because it's so unique. And so he puts it in, and I don't remember the name. And we saw a few seconds of it, a few minutes. And we made excuses. A lot of us stood up and said, we have to leave. We couldn't stand to see it, to watch it.
But Jose found this engaging.
Hysterically funny.
In a disconcerting revelation just 6 weeks before her untimely death, Kitty Menendez disclosed to her therapist that she was hiding sick and embarrassing secrets about her family dynamics.
Dr. Summerford was testified that he saw Kitty Menendez from February 27, 1987 to August 16, 1989. We met Jose Menendez one time and would have given his impressions of Mr. Menendez. That he was controlling, dominating, arrogant, not concerned with her well-being. She had secrets which she characterized as sick and embarrassing, that she felt were very profound and were at the core of her depression, but that he could not get her to deal with those issues and was in fact afraid to have her face those issues if she was not hospitalized.
Additionally, 4 months prior to the tragic killings, Lyle Menendez confided in his friend Donovan Goudreau about the abuse that both he and his brother had endured. During his testimony as a witness for the prosecution, Donovan initially refuted these allegations.
Did you reveal something about your own background of a personal nature
Yes, I did.
to Lyle? And did he, in response to that, reveal something to you about his and his brother's background?
No.
Did he ever tell you that he and his brother had been molested by their father?
No, he didn't.
However, he was later confronted with audio recordings that revealed he had acknowledged the abuse prior to the trial.
How did that conversation start? We were in a Chinese food restaurant towards the end of early May, and this, I think it's before he found out about my lies. One of the reasons we were friends is because we had so much in common with this, the way we suffered in our experience, and then to bring this into the relationship as far as an experience we both shared. That we've never spoken to or about to anybody. Basically, he said that his father abusing her. Yeah, him there. And Lyle. Yeah.
At the tender age of 14, Lyle Menendez penned a school essay entitled, "I Will Change Your Verdict." The essay centered around a man facing imminent execution for killing a child in an effort to protect a 12-year-old boy. This piece was written shortly after Lyle became aware of the fact that his father had been abusing his younger brother, Erik, who was also just 12 years old at the time.
You need to decide what was going on in Erik and Lyle Menendez's mind that night before you can decide what kind of crime was committed. The best that you can do, in this case from our perspective, is a manslaughter, because that is an unreasonable killing in good faith. And it is our suggestion to you that that is what has occurred here.
The verdicts for the Menendez brothers were notably influenced by the gender dynamics within the jury. Female jurors leaned towards suggesting a verdict of voluntary manslaughter, reflecting a degree of empathy for the brothers' claims of having acted out of fear and in response to years of alleged abuse. In contrast, male jurors were more inclined to advocate for conviction of first-degree murder, viewing the brothers' actions as premeditated and intentional.
Erik's attorney had tried to paint him as a less culpable younger brother. Leslie Abramson said she never felt the whole jury was open-minded.
I think that there were jurors on this jury who were completely biased, who were the minute they sat down and who still are, and we were not able to reveal that because we were not allowed to ask them any questions.
After a lengthy month of intense deliberations, the trial ultimately ended in a mistrial on January 13, 1994 for Erik, and on January 24th for Lyle.
Well, Connie, the jurors deciding the fate of Erik Menendez have deadlocked. They are hung on the most serious charge of first-degree murder and lesser charges against him. The judge has called a mistrial. This does not mean that Erik Menendez will be set free. It is unlikely the judge will let him out of jail because the district attorney has said Erik Menendez will be tried again. It was a judicial repeat of what happened 2 weeks ago. Only this time, it was the jury deciding the fate of older brother Lyle Menendez.
I find that the jury is hopelessly deadlocked, and the court declares a mistrial.
They found themselves at a deadlock regarding whether the brothers should be convicted of manslaughter, potentially due to the alleged abuse they'd endured, or if they should be charged with first-degree murder, reflecting a more severe interpretation of their actions. This division underscored the contentious nature of the case and set the stage for further legal battles ahead. With the case of the Menendez brothers being highly publicized, there was a huge fuss when the trial ended in a hung jury. The public, some in support and some against the brothers, were strongly opinionated and wanted to see a definitive verdict in the case. This urge came from a string of trials of some previous highly publicized, terrifying cases which had left everyone longing for conviction. It started with the McMartin preschool case. In 1983, a number of teachers and staff members from the McMartin preschool were accused of ritualized child sexual abuse. Out of all the accused, only 2 went to trial, but no one was convicted as a result of a hung jury. In 1991, Rodney King, an African-American man, became the victim of racism and police brutality. Four white cops were filmed beating him in Los Angeles, California in the early hours of March 3, 1991. At the end of the trial, all the 4 cops accused were acquitted, leaving the public outraged, which eventually led to riots. But was this pressure enough to make Stanley Martin Weisberg, the judge presiding over the Menendez trials, make some desperate and unethical decisions? By the time Erik and Lyle Menendez began to disclose the horrific abuse they'd suffered at the hands of their father, the public sentiment towards them had already turned sour.
Affected by the fact that when the police supposedly arrived, did you hear this testimony? The police arrived, those boys had gone out onto the front lawn and they were crying hysterically about what had happened. Mm-hmm. And so after hearing that story, I never believed any of the other tears. I never believed any of the other tears because I go, they were crying hysterically when the police came. Oh, our parents just happened,
For years, the narrative of the spoiled rich boys had dominated the media coverage surrounding their case, painting the brothers as entitled and callous individuals who'd murdered their parents solely for financial gain. Even their emotional testimonies, in which they recounted the anguish of their father's abuse, were met with skepticism and derision, leading to widespread mockery. Moreover, in a particularly scathing sketch aired in October 1993, the iconic television show Saturday Night Live parodied the brothers, mimicking their flat, emotionless voices and the way their faces would contort into exaggerated displays of sorrow, which some derisively referred to as crocodile tears. As the years rolled on, the shaming and ridicule persisted, significantly influencing public opinion about the Menendez brothers. By October 1995, when the effort to publicly humiliate them and portray them as cruel, pampered brats reached its zenith, the second trial commenced. However, this trial would unfold under vastly different circumstances.
One thing that we have asked the judge to do is to limit the so-called abuse excuse, to limit evidence that has nothing to do with this case.
And so all the rulings from the first trial changed in the state's favor. There were various instructional issues. There was expert testimony that wasn't permitted in the second trial. The sexual abuse evidence that had been admitted at the first trial for the defense was no longer admissible.
Judge Weisberg, eager to bring closure to the case, made a shocking and controversial ruling that would undermine the defense's entire strategy.
Judge Stanley Weisberg this time says he will limit the number of experts and witnesses called to support the so-called abuse excuse defense.
The judge said
Well, Erik and Lyle are not women, so the battered women syndrome doesn't apply. So all of that trauma is not relevant and is not allowed to the second trial. Leslie had a virtual panic attack in the courtroom when she heard this ruling. She was screaming and yelling. It's one thing to be biased, but it's another thing to let your bias affect your judicial decisions in the courtroom. It was a stunning moment.
He declared that the defense could not introduce evidence regarding the sexual abuse, reasoning that the battered woman syndrome, often invoked in domestic abuse cases, could not be applied to the brothers simply because they were men. This ruling suggested, in his view, that men could not act out in a violent manner as a result of having been sexually abused.
The judge has ruled that he will not allow the brothers to call all of their family and friends as witnesses, curtailing the defense's case.
And in fact, what they didn't allow the jury to hear made it worse because the defense evidence that was presented was so trivial. So we don't hear that Lyle, when he was 8 years old, told Diane that his father was touching his. We don't hear that Lyle, when he was 12 or 13, wrote an essay about a father put on death row for molesting his child. What we do hear is that his father didn't put a Band-Aid on his knee. The prosecutor was able to stand up in closing and say, "You've heard no evidence of sexual abuse." And the prosecutor was right, but only because he had excluded the evidence.
Consequently, the defense lost its ability to argue for a manslaughter charge based on this abuse, leaving the jury with only two stark options: no murder or first-degree murder. This devastating ruling effectively stripped Erik and Lyle of their only viable chance at a fair trial. As the trial progressed, Judge Weisberg further determined that there was insufficient evidence to substantiate the claim that the brothers were in imminent danger when they committed the murders. While he did permit the defense to argue that the brothers shot Jose in a moment of passion, he ruled that this reasoning could not be applied to their mother, Kitty. He acknowledged that there was enough evidence to suggest that Jose may have provoked his sons into committing homicide, but he found no sufficient indication that Kitty had played a similar role in the tragic events. Ultimately, at the conclusion of the second trial in March of 1996, both Erik and Lyle were convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances for having acted with premeditation and lying in wait. Additionally, they were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. During the penalty phase of the trial, the brothers were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, sealing their fate and marking a tragic end to a case that had captivated and divided public opinion for years.
We will spend the rest of our life in prison. If we're not put in the same prison, there's a good probability I will never see him again. And that would be very, very difficult to live through.
After their conviction, the heart-wrenching reality set in as Lyle and Erik were transferred to separate prisons, an unfathomable fate for 2 brothers who had been inseparable throughout their lives. The last time they laid eyes on each other was in 1996, after they'd been sentenced, when they caught a glimpse of one another across the prison yard. Separate transports whisked them away to different facilities, and from that moment on, a profound sense of isolation enveloped them. Months turned into an agonizing blur, and the brothers fought to cope with the emotional distance that now separated them. On July 2nd, 1996, Lyle took a step towards building a new life when he married Anna Erickson in a ceremony attended by their devoted attorney, Leslie Abramson, and his aunt, Marta Menendez. However, this union would ultimately crumble. By April 1st, 2001, the marriage ended in divorce after Anna discovered that Lyle had been unfaithful, leaving behind a trail of heartbreak. Meanwhile, Erik sought solace in love as well. On June 12, 1999, he married Tammy Ruth Sackerman in a modest ceremony held in the waiting room of Folsom State Prison, a poignant reminder of their harsh reality, but still a celebration of love in the face of adversity. Throughout the years, Lyle was relentless in his efforts to be transferred closer to Erik. The distance felt unbearable, a separation that gnawed at his spirit. Finally, on February 22, 2018, Lyle's persistent requests bore fruit when he was moved from Mule Creek State Prison in Northern California to the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego, where Erik had been incarcerated since 2013. The anticipation of reuniting with his brother filled Lyle's heart with hope.
I ended up bursting into tears, which is quite an emotional
Well, it was unexpectedly so, I think, for me. I thought maybe I'd just beaten up. It was just something I wasn't sure was ever going to happen. It was just a remarkable moment.
Then, on April 4th, 2018, the moment they'd both yearned for finally arrived. Erik moved to Lyle's unit, and when the guard opened the door, the brothers were met with the emotional release they'd both craved. Lyle saw Erik, and in that instant, they both burst into tears immediately. The dam of emotions they'd held back for so long broke, and they embraced tightly, clinging to each other as if afraid to let go. New evidence has emerged that could bolster Erik and Lyle Menendez's claims of having killed their parents in self-defense after enduring a lifetime of horrific abuse. Their defense attorney, Cliff Gardner, is now actively working to secure their release from prison. In fact, one of Erik and Lyle's former prison mates spoke to the media about what he learned about the Menendez brothers while he was with them behind bars.
I will tell you this, Laura. I believe 100% that they were abused. There's no question about it. Lyle especially opened up to me about, incidents that he had in a way. And, he talked about his mother, got tears in his eyes when he talked about his mother. But he had a vengeance for his dad. He really did. Like there was some deep, dark stuff going on there with his father.
Well, what did he say? Tell us what he said to you to have you say that.
Well, he said my father was mean. He was very demanding. He didn't spare the rod. He would get physical with me all the time. And he said, Michael, he would go like this. He was abusive. He was very abusive, and it started when I was young. And the way he said it, I got the feeling, because, I didn't want to ask him, and get into him, but I knew there was more than just getting beat. There was something more to that. And then when he said it, a lot of times his eyes, he would tear up, and I, honestly too, I said, Lyle, listen, I came from the street, but that was a pretty brutal thing you did. He said, I was just scared. Mm-hmm. I was scared of my mom and dad. And I even asked him, I said, didn't your mom protect you? And he said, no, she didn't protect me.
Another pivotal piece of new evidence is a letter that was penned by Erik Menendez to his cousin, Andy Cano, in December 1998, approximately 8 months before the tragic events unfolded. Following Andy's untimely passing, his mother discovered this poignant letter among his belongings, revealing the raw and painful struggles that 17-year-old Erik faced in the shadow of ongoing sexual abuse.
In a stunning announcement earlier this month, LA County DA George Gascon saying his office is reevaluating the murder case in light of new evidence, including a letter Erik wrote to a cousin 8 months before the murders, detailing the alleged abuse.
If you don't mind if I'll read it. Mom isn't doing too good. It's like she's here physically, but mentally, she's just like gone, if you know what I mean. She freaks out over nothing. I feel bad for her. I don't know why she puts up with that shit. And this is where it gets particularly interesting. So now I'm stuck here alone. I've been trying to avoid Dad. It's still happening, Andy, but it's worse for me now. I can't explain it. He's so overweight that I can't stand to see him. I never know when it's going to happen, and it's driving me crazy. Every night I stay up thinking he might come in. I need to put it out of my mind. I know what you said before, but I'm afraid. You just don't know Dad like I do. He's crazy. He's warned me 100 times about telling anyone, especially Lyle. Am I a serious wimpus? I don't know. I'll make it through this. I can handle it, Andy. I need to stop thinking about it. And this was just a few months before the shooting.
During the brothers' trials, Andy Cano testified, recounting how Erik had confided in him years before the killings, revealing that their father was touching him inappropriately. However, the prosecution cast doubt on Andy's credibility, suggesting that he was lying. Tragically, Andy was just 15 years old when Lyle and Erik were taken into custody, and he passed away in 2003 at the age of 30 due to an overdose of sleeping pills. His mother, Jose's sister, expressed her belief that her son's feelings of guilt over his cousin's plight, coupled with his inability to cope with the weight of the situation, played a significant role in his heartbreaking demise. In light of the new evidence, family and friends of the Menendez brothers have made a heartfelt public plea for their release, having served more than 3 decades in prison for the fatal shootings of their wealthy parents and their Beverly Hills home.
too much punishment. They were punished just by being with that man all those years and having their mother ignore it.
Nearly 24 relatives set to gather in Los Angeles tomorrow, putting pressure on the district attorney to officially recommend resentencing in their case.
Was this a miscarriage of justice?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, it was a miscarriage of justice.
Erik and Lyle never stopped receiving love and support from their family members, all of whom believed them, except one.
My sister Joan, who is, as far as I'm concerned, a family turncoat. And I didn't realize how close she was with the Menendez brothers.
The truth is, Lyle and Erik were failed by the very people who should have protected them.
Their uncle says Erik and Lyle should remain behind bars forever.
These two guys were spoiled brats. They wanted the millions. They wanted it now.
So you think this was a killing based on greed?
Strictly greed. I think they should die of old age in prison. I loved my sister and I protected her in life, and I will love my sister and protect her in her death.
On April 18th, 2023, the case took another shocking turn when Roy Rosselló, a former member of the Puerto Rican boy band Menudo, alleged that Erik and Lyle's father, Jose Menendez, assaulted him during his teenage years. Rosselló recounted visiting Jose's home in the fall of 1983 or 1984, where he was given a glass of wine and subsequently felt as though he'd lost control over his body. He alleged that Jose took him to a separate room, further claiming that he suffered sexual abuse at the hands of Jose on 2 other occasions. In May 2023, the brothers formally requested a new hearing based on the recent allegations against their father. Their appeal cites the letter Erik wrote to Andy Cano in 1998, where he revealed the abuse he endured. Gardner filed a habeas petition presenting this letter along with Rosselló's affidavit as compelling new evidence, arguing that the convictions of his clients should be overturned. On October 3, 2024, Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon held a press conference announcing that his office was actively reviewing the appeal. Just weeks later, on October 24, 2024, Gascon made a significant announcement. He would be asking the court for a resentencing of the brothers' case. If a judge accepts his recommendation, Erik and Lyle could potentially become eligible for parole. Gascon emphasized that the final decision would rest with the judge, and subsequently the case would go before a parole board to determine whether the brothers should be granted their freedom. The prospect of hope looms on the horizon for Erik and Lyle as they await the outcome that could finally bring them some measure of peace and the possibility of reunion after so many years apart. The Menendez brothers' case is a tragic story of deeply rooted familial dysfunction and psychological abuse. While their actions resulted in the horrific deaths of their parents, their claims of years of severe physical and emotional abuse cannot be ignored. Rather than cold, calculated killers, they could be seen as deeply traumatized individuals pushed to a breaking point. A verdict that considers manslaughter rather than first-degree murder might better reflect the mitigating circumstances of their upbringing and the psychological toll they endured. Justice should account not only for the act, but also for the profound human suffering that led to it. Based on all the facts and evidence presented, what would be your verdict? Manslaughter or murder in the first degree? With all the new evidence that's turned up recently, do you think Erik and Lyle have a chance to be free now? Judge Weisberg robbed the Menendez brothers of their chance at a fair trial and got away with it. Do you think he should be held accountable for his hasty and desperate actions? Let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. If there's a case you'd like us to cover, don't hesitate to drop your recommendations in the comment section below. For more captivating true crime stories, like, share, and subscribe to M7 Crime Storytime. If you appreciate our content, consider becoming a member and unlock early access to exclusive content.